Hey, welcome to another episode of GeekOutdoors.com. Now, on my continuing series on making the move from Windows or Mac over to Linux, today I'm going to be talking about user management. Now, if you haven't seen my original video where I show you how to install VirtualBox and then install Linux Mint within VirtualBox, be sure to check that out in the description area below. So let's go ahead and head over to the virtual machine. Now, when it comes to user management, this is something that a lot of people are familiar with, whether they're from the Windows world or the Mac world. Typically, on your Windows accounts, you are given an administrative user account. That's what you get whenever you log in and you're using your operating system. Okay. Now, in the Linux world, it works very similarly. However, it's really different underneath, because Linux is inherently a very permissions-based type system, and so there's a lot of things that go with that along with security. And so in very general terms, in Linux there's really two main types of users. Okay, there is the root user or the super user, and this user can do absolutely anything on your system. Okay, and then the other user are the standard users, but they are given certain permissions to do things. Okay, and that's what your user accounts are. So whenever you install Linux and you set up a user, you are actually given certain administrative permissions to do things on the systems, such as installing programs, deleting programs, and so forth, and also doing some administrative functions. However, you still need to be root to do anything really critical on the system. So that's a measure of security. So that keeps people from actually destroying the whole operating system. Whereas in Windows, with your administrative account, you can do a lot of damage to your system. Okay. But with that being said, Linux, at least Linux Mint and a lot of Ubuntu based systems, do not give you the root user account by default. Okay. So you will probably rarely ever log in with as root. Okay, and as a matter of fact, you would have to create a password for root. So with that being said, you don't have to worry about that as a general user, because you're just going to be using your standard user account. Okay, so whenever you log in and you look at your folders, you have your own home directory. Okay, so this is the user account Geek, and it has its own directories underneath there. Okay, so if you were to create another user, it would have its own separate home directory. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. And I already have a dummy account created, but I'm going to show you how that works. So if you go here in your menu and then administration and then users and groups, you're going to be asked for your password, and you notice I have my main Geek account, and then I also have another account that I created called test user. Okay, and so if you notice here, there's an account type, name, password, and also groups. Okay, and on your account type, you have two different ones, standard and administrator. Okay, and the only difference between that is the permissions, the group permissions that it has. Okay, so if you go to test user, which is a standard account, it only has these group permissions. Okay, and let me show you what that means. So these are all the different group permissions. So what that means is, if you are part of these groups, you are allowed certain permissions to do things. Okay, and for a general user, you don't have to worry about this, but that's kind of what that means. Okay, so if you were to create a brand new user, you would choose whether they would want to be a standard or administrator, and then they would get the appropriate permissions with that user. And at the same time, you can actually adjust the permissions that they get. Okay, so that's how user accounts are created, and that's really how they work, in very general terms. And then if you actually go back here, and let me go to the top level, and you go to home, you'll notice I have two different folders, one for Geek, which is the current user that I'm using, and then one for test user, which doesn't have anything yet, but you get the idea there. And the whole idea with this is to keep things separate and to keep things secure. Okay, and that's why it's done this way. Now, with that being said, I'm going to show you a few things about the permissions and directory ownership. Okay, and so like I said, in another episode, I'm going to go in more depth in permissions, but I just want to show you a few things. So if you open up your home directory and you go to file system, and I did mention this in an earlier episode, this one right here, this is the root directory. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, root is the super user, the most powerful user. So all of these directories are actually owned by root. Okay, so that means that this user Geek would not be able to have permissions to manipulate any of these files or folders in these directories because they're owned by root. Okay, so for example, I downloaded some new fonts. I downloaded from dufffonts.com, and they're right here, and I've already extracted them. These are the 2 new fonts that I want, and I want to use these fonts for all the programs such as LibreOffice. I want these new fonts to be available. Okay, and so in order to do that, it needs to be in the user share font directory, and this will make these new fonts available to everybody on this operating system and available to all programs. Okay, so that's what I'm actually doing here. So if you notice here, if I simply try to right click, copy and paste, there's no option to paste. Okay, now I'm going to show you another way to do that through the GUI. Okay, so that is because of the permissions that I just mentioned a little bit earlier. All of this is owned by root. It's not owned by Geek. So Geek doesn't have permissions to write anything or to manipulate it unless they were doing it as the root user or with root permissions. Okay, so let me show you how that works on the command line. Okay, and so the same concept. So I'm going to be basically trying to do the same thing I did with the GUI in the command line, so you kind of can see how that works. So I'm going to go to that directory. And so I'm going to try to copy this directory, and don't worry about these commands, but copy -r, that means recursive. Okay, and I want to copy this whole directory, and I'm going to show you how that works in this directory here, which I own, and then I'm going to try to do the same thing on a directory that I don't own, so that you kind of see the difference. Okay, so let me go ahead and do this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to copy this whole directory on the command line over to my home directory. Okay, so and see, there it is. It's been copied, and all the contents, here's the original, see all the contents, and so it copied it perfectly. Now what I wanted to do was copy this directory. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this so you could see that I was able to copy it successfully. Now I wanted to copy this whole directory from here to here, so I tried to do that earlier through the GUI, but I'm going to try to do the same thing through the command line so that you can kind of see a different part of it, a different way of doing it. So okay, so I'm going to try to copy it here. Okay, so as you can see there, permission is denied. Okay, you have no access to do that. So I'm going to show you 2 ways in which you could actually copy it over. I'm going to show you I guess the more nerdy way, but then I'm going to show you the GUI way, the easier way, in my opinion, for a lot of people who are coming from Windows, and it's actually my preferred method. Okay, so let's do that again. Now if you wanted to execute things or do things with root permissions, execute a command, then you would use the command sudo. Okay, now there's another command called su, but I'm not going to be talking about that. Okay, but we'll do the same command. Let's see there. I'm gonna put this here. Okay, so I've done the same thing, and let's go ahead and press enter. And sudo means that you're using it's called super user do. Okay, so you're running the command, but you're using root permissions to do that. Okay, so now it's going to ask for your password. Oops. And see, it copied it over right there perfectly. Okay, and so if I open up the program, let's say open up this LibreWriter program, you see now there's that new font that I just copied, Elderly. That's a small font, but let me increase the font size. So this is the brand new font that I just copied over. Okay, so you see how that works. Now I also want to copy this font as well, Amotiladios, but I don't want to go through the command line. I want to do it using GUI. Okay, so how would I do that? Okay, the very simple way to do it is, okay, you want to copy to this folder, right? You would right click on your mouse and then open as root, okay? And then you would type in your password. And so now you'll notice it looks different, okay? It has elevated privileges. And so what I'm doing here is I'm basically doing this sudo command just as I did there, and then it asked me for a password, which it did here as well. Okay, so it's doing the exact same thing that I just did through the command line, okay? However, I think this is a lot easier for a lot of people. So I go here, so I'll copy, and now I have the paste option available. And now it's there. And if I open my LibreOffice program or LibreWriter, it should show up. There it is. Amatadio. So let's make sure that works. Yeah, works perfectly. Okay, so that is really how, you know, user accounts work. And also you saw a little bit of how permissions work in the system, and also a little bit of a command line as well. So if you had any questions on this, you know, leave it in the comments area below. And I think for the majority of users, you're rarely going to go into this directory, but you know, it's something that you might want to know how to do. Okay, so if you had any other ideas on this, or any other shortcuts, or maybe other tactics to do this, you know, leave that in the area of the comments area below as well. And as always, if you did get a lot of value out of these videos, leave a like and subscribe. And if you wanted to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/geekoutdoors. That information is in the description area as well. Thanks for watching. See you in the episode. Thanks for checking out this episode. And as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com. And I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.